For 27 years, I stood by my husband's side, believing we were partners in every sense, through moves, losses, and raising two daughters. I worked two jobs when he lost his, and I never once asked for recognition. I didn't need grand gestures, just the quiet assurance that we were in it together. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, I stopped by his office with lunch, something I hadn't done in years. His assistant asked if I was his sister, because that's what he told everyone. My name wasn't on his desk, no picture of our family. Nothing that showed I even existed. That same night was our wedding anniversary. I made reservations. I wore the dress he used to love. But he arrived late, distracted, and he wasn't alone. A woman trailed in behind him, and the expression on her face said more than he ever had. I didn't cry. I didn't cause a scene. But I remembered everything. And what I did next didn't involve revenge. It involved reclaiming the dignity I had quietly handed away for nearly 3 decades. It started, as so many long stories do, in a quiet and hopeful time. I met Gary when I was 24. He was charming, tall, charismatic, and ambitious in a way that felt contagious. We met at a county fair of all places, while standing in line for lemon ice. He struck up a conversation about the music playing overhead, and by the time we reached the front of the line, we were exchanging numbers. Our courtship was fast but genuine. Within a year, we were married, standing beneath a willow tree in my parents' backyard. Gary promised me a life of stability and partnership, and for a while it felt like we had it. We bought a modest house on the outskirts of Raleigh, and soon enough, we were raising 2 daughters, Amy and Lauren. I stepped away from my job as a bank teller after our second child. Gary's career was on an upward path in corporate marketing. He traveled often and I stayed home, managing the details he said he couldn't be bothered with. School appointments, home repairs, birthdays. I was the reliable one, the one who held it all together. But as the years passed, that role hardened into something else. When Gary's mother fell ill, it was me who cared for her through her final year. When he lost his job during the 2008 crash, I took on night shifts at a grocery store, never complaining. When he forgot our anniversary 3 years in a row, I told myself it was just stress. Because we don't leave marriages over forgetfulness. We don't throw away families over hurt feelings. That's what I believed. Until I found out he didn't even acknowledge me at his workplace. Gary worked for a mid-sized regional marketing firm. He'd been there for nearly 8 years, often pulling long hours and mentioning the same names at the dinner table. Ryan from analytics, Jen in HR, and most recently, Sandy from events. I never thought twice about it. Gary had always been sociable, maybe too much at times. It was Amy who first noticed something strange. She was home visiting from college and mentioned in passing, "Dad never posts pictures of us at work, huh?" I brushed it off, but later that night I looked through his LinkedIn. Every photo was work-related, not a single family image, no mention of being married. His About section said, "Focused on personal growth, mentorship, and innovation." No mention of the man who used to fall asleep with a baby on his chest. The turning point came that Tuesday afternoon when I decided on a whim to bring Gary lunch. It was a little out of character. I hadn't done that in years, but I was nearby and thought it might be a nice gesture. A small surprise. I walked into the office holding a bag of warm takeout, and the young receptionist smiled. "Oh, are you his sister?" she asked cheerfully. I paused. "No, I'm his wife." Her face flushed, and she stammered something about how that's just what he told us. I asked to leave lunch in his office and quietly walked out. I sat in my car for several minutes, unable to start the engine. Something broke loose in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just emptiness. I didn't tell him I came by. I went home, put the laundry away, and started cooking for our anniversary dinner that evening. I had made reservations, but old habits die hard. I didn't say a word. That evening, I wore the navy dress he used to love, the one I hadn't worn in years, because it made me feel seen once. The restaurant was quiet, candlelit, with the kind of old-world charm Gary used to say he admired. I sat there, waiting. He was 15 minutes late, then 20. I was about to call him when he walked in, looking disheveled, confused, and behind him, trailing only 2 steps away, was a woman in a red blazer. They both stopped when they saw. She looked at me like someone realizing they'd walked into the wrong house. He looked annoyed. "Oh," he said with a tight smile. "I didn't realize you meant tonight." I stood up slowly. "It's our anniversary." He blinked. "Right, yes. I thought that was next week." The woman awkwardly offered her hand. "I'm Sandy from work." I didn't take her hand. I turned to Gary. "She knows you're married?" He stammered. "Of course. I mean, sort of. Look, we didn't plan this. We were just talking about a project and thought we'd grab a bite. In the same restaurant I booked weeks ago." Sandy took a small step back. "I think I'll leave you two alone." And she did. Gary sat down with a sigh. "You're making this more dramatic than it is." That's when it hit me. Not the betrayal, but the ease with which he dismissed me. The way my presence was a complication rather than a comfort. And so I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I saw something clearly for the first time. I had made myself invisible long before he did. That night, after Gary had stumbled through a half-hearted apology and paid the bill with the same detachment he'd use buying gas, I drove home alone. He said he'd take a walk to clear his head, and I didn't ask where. I didn't want to know. The ride back was quiet. No music. Just the sound of my tires against the road and the faint echo of my breath. I had spent so much of my life caring how Gary felt, what made him tired, what made him anxious, what would cheer him up after a hard day. But in that moment I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me how I felt. Maybe because I had stopped asking. Myself too. When I got home, I went straight to our bedroom. I didn't turn on the light. I sat at the edge of the bed and took off the dress, folding it gently as if it were something sacred. I placed it on a chair and just sat there, in my slip, staring at nothing. Time moves differently in that room. It stretched and swirled around. The silence I'd kept for decades. People think heartbreak is loud, shouting, crying, plates crashing. But it isn't. It's quiet. It's the pause in a sentence, the way your hands hesitate before folding laundry, the stillness when you hear the front door and realize you don't care if it opens or not. For years, I had measured my worth in small acts, keeping the house warm, remembering birthdays, managing the chaos of 2 kids, doctor appointments, new shoes, late-night science projects. I kept thinking, this is what love is. This is what being a wife means. But what happens when those acts go unseen for too long? When does love become a service instead of a sanctuary? I lay down without brushing my teeth, without turning down the bed. I closed my eyes and tried to picture our early days, the wedding under the willow tree, Gary holding Lauren for the first time, the road trip to Colorado where we got lost and ended up dancing in a gas station parking lot. Those memories used to make me smile. That night, they felt like pages from someone else's book. The next morning, I woke up to find Gary asleep on the couch. He didn't wake when I passed him. I looked at him, really looked. The lines on his face had deepened. His hair was thinning more than I remembered. But what struck me most was how unfamiliar he felt. This man I had loved. This man I had defended, excused, forgiven. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. The girls' photos lined the wall. School portraits, prom pictures, graduation smiles. In each one, I could see my hands behind the scenes. I had always been the frame, never the portrait. And then I asked myself a question I hadn't dared voice in years. What would my life look like without him in it? Not in a bitter way. Not as revenge. But simply, what if I stopped waiting for him to see me? That thought stayed with me all day. I didn't bring it up when Gary finally woke and muttered something about late meetings. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. But I did watch him. The way he moved, the way he avoided my eyes. The way he didn't ask me once if I was okay. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote myself a letter. Not to him, to me. I wrote about the girl I used to be who wore yellow sweaters and dreamed of writing a novel one day. I wrote about the woman I became and how she survived more than anyone gave her credit for. I wrote that I deserved to be seen, even if it had to start with my own reflection in the mirror. And when I folded the letter and tucked it in the drawer beside my bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Steady. Not angry. Not broken. Just ready. The days that followed had a strange stillness to them, like the quiet that comes after a heavy snow, soft, muffled, and unfamiliar. Gary returned to his usual rhythm, early mornings, late nights, half-hearted conversations over dinner. But I had shifted in a way he didn't notice. Or perhaps he did and chose not to ask. I didn't confront him about the sister lie. I didn't press about Sandy. Something deeper than confrontation was happening inside me. A slow awakening. I wasn't waiting for an explanation anymore. I was watching, observing, learning to sit with the truth instead of fighting it. For the first time in years, I made choices without consulting him. Small ones, but significant to me. I spent a whole afternoon cleaning out the attic and found a box of short stories I had written in my 20s. Some were typed, others handwritten on napkins, receipts, the back of grocery lists. Reading them made me remember a version of myself I had long shelved, curious, expressive, full of voice. I enrolled in a local writing workshop at the community center. Twice a week I'd leave the house with a notebook and a flask of coffee, telling Gary I had errands to run. He didn't ask what kind. That silence, which used to sting, now gave me room to breathe. At the workshop, I met women like me, retired, separated, quietly reinventing themselves. We read each other's stories, sipped tea, and talked about things that mattered: loss, reinvention, memory, identity. One woman, Denise, said something I wrote down in the margins of my notebook. You don't need to blow up your life to reclaim it. Sometimes, you just need to stop erasing yourself. It struck me deeply. That's what I had done for years. Erased. Myself line by line, smoothing the edges of my wants and disappointments, until I became a shape only others could define. Around that time, Amy called from school. She sensed something had changed. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked gently. I paused, then smiled. I think I'm getting there. She didn't press for details. She just said, "Good. You deserve that." It wasn't a resolution in the dramatic sense. No ultimatums, no packed bags. But it was a shift in the tide. I had stopped waiting for Gary to fix what he wouldn't admit was broken. I had stopped needing validation from the man who once held my heart and started giving it to myself, page by page, word by word. And in that quiet return to myself, I found a strange sort of peace. The peace I had found began to fray about. 3 weeks later, when I came home to find an envelope on the kitchen table, unsealed, plain, with my name written in Gary's handwriting. He was nowhere in sight. Inside was a brochure for a weekend leadership retreat in Asheville. Tucked behind it was a note. Sandy thinks it would be good for me. I might stay a few extra days. No explanation, no conversation, just a casual mention of a trip, approved and organized by another woman, with no regard for my feelings. It wasn't the retreat that stung. It was the audacity of letting someone else decide what he needed, while I was left to interpret silence once again. That night, when he returned home, I asked plainly, "Are you having an affair with her?" He looked tired, like someone worn down by pretending. "No," he said, "it's not like that, we're just close." Close. That word echoed, the kind of closeness that let him erase his wife at work, the kind that had him choosing another woman's approval over mine. He didn't apologize, he didn't reassure me. He just walked away. That's when I knew he wasn't confused. He wasn't unsure. He was comfortable with my silence, with my acceptance, with my disappearing. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the ticking of the clock counting out the minutes of my restraint. And then I got up, I pulled out my old suitcase, not to pack, not yet, but to remind myself that I could, that leaving was no longer unthinkable. The next day, I didn't wait for him to mention the retreat again. I simply said, "I won't be here when you get back. I'm visiting Amy for the weekend." It was the first time I had said anything unpredictable in years. He blinked, unsure of how to respond. "Oh, okay. Should I, book your ticket?" "I already did," I replied, then walked out of the room. I wasn't angry. I was clear. And that clarity unsettled him more than any fight ever had. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim small parts of myself. I wrote until midnight. I called old friends. I painted the guest bedroom in a color he always said was too bright. It looked beautiful. But Gary, he grew quieter. Distant, yes, but not indifferent. For the first time, he seemed to sense that I was no longer afraid of absence. That I had, somewhere along the way, started preparing to live without him. And that, I think, was the real beginning of the end. Not a slammed door, but the slow withdrawal of someone who had finally realized she was worth more than waiting. Visiting. Amy was more than a change of scenery. It was like breathing air I hadn't tasted in years. Her little apartment off campus was cluttered in a warm, lived-in way. Books on the coffee table, dishes drying near the sink, a blanket tossed over the back of a chair. It was a space that felt like life in motion, not paused. She welcomed me, with open arms and gentle eyes. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She didn't ask for the ugly parts. She simply made space for my presence, cooked pasta, and poured me wine. That night we watched old movies on her couch under a blanket, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed. We talked about my writing. She asked to read something. I let her. She read in silence, flipping the pages of my short story with a careful grace. When she finished, she said, "Mom, you've got a voice. Why did you stop?" "I thought my life was full," I answered. "But now I see. It was just full of tasks, not me." She didn't cry. Neither did I. But we both knew something was changing. I stayed the whole weekend, longer than I told Gary I would, and I didn't call to check in. On Sunday evening, I finally turned my phone back on. There were only 2 messages. One was from Gary. "Let me know when you're heading home." The other was from an unknown number. I clicked it open and read, "I didn't know he was married. I'm sorry. Sandy." No other words, just that. It landed softly, but with weight. She had found out the truth, likely recently, likely from him, and likely after a conversation that didn't go how she expected. I didn't reply. There was nothing I needed to say. When I returned home late Monday, Gary was in the kitchen drinking tea he never used to like. His posture was different, slightly hunched, like someone waiting for a verdict. He looked up. "Did you see the message?" "I did." "I told her," he said quietly. "Everything about us, about how long we've been drifting. Drifting. A convenient word for a slow abandonment." He set the cup down. "I didn't cheat, not physically, but I let someone else in where you should have been. I won't defend it." For the first time in years, he was still, not defensive, not dismissive, just still. I sat down across from him. "Why did you call me your sister at work?" He closed his eyes briefly. "I don't know. Maybe I wanted to seem freer than I was. Maybe I was tired of pretending we were happy when we weren't. And now, I'm tired of pretending, period." There it was. No plea, no grand confession, just a quiet truth laid bare. I nodded. Then, "Stop pretending, let's both stop." He looked at me, unsure. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not going to live invisible anymore. Not here, not anywhere." The words weren't cruel. They were calm, final. And I saw in his eyes what he never thought he'd lose. Not just a wife, but the comfort of being quietly forgiven. Forever. In the weeks that followed, we shared a house, but not a marriage. Conversations turned into logistics. What day the trash went out, whether the car needed servicing, who would be home for the plumber. The rhythm of our life continued. But the music had changed. There was no laughter, no softness, only a quiet recognition that something had ended. I started sleeping in the guest room. I told the girls, gently but honestly, that their father and I were taking time apart. Amy wasn't surprised. Lauren cried, but only once. Then she hugged me and whispered, "I just want you to be happy, Mom." And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could be. I continued with the writing group. I submitted one of my stories to a local publication, and they accepted it. The day the piece went live, I printed out a copy and framed it. Not to boast, but to remind myself I still existed. My voice hadn't died. It had just been waiting. Gary didn't fight me when I asked for a legal separation. He signed the papers quietly, respectfully. I could see something in him shift, regret perhaps, but not resistance. Maybe he knew. Maybe he had always known. On the day I moved my things into a small rental home on the other side of town, he helped carry boxes. We stood in the driveway one last time, neither of us quite knowing what to say. "I was a fool," he said finally. I was silent, I replied. We nodded. No blame, just the truth. And then I walked inside my new home, alone, but not lonely. Surrounded by boxes of books, not burdens. Windows that opened, not walls that closed in. My life had narrowed for years into a role I forgot I could outgrow. Now, it was mine again. There was grief, yes, but also peace, a steady, growing peace. Looking back now, I don't think Gary ever intended to betray me in the beginning. His failures weren't rooted in malice. They were born of neglect, of emotional laziness, of assuming I would always be there, no matter how invisible I became. But betrayal doesn't always come as a sharp wound. Sometimes it arrives slowly, like fog, dulling everything you used to see clearly. And I let it happen. That's the hardest truth I've had to sit with. Not because I was weak, but because I thought endurance was love. I believed that sacrificing pieces of myself was noble, even holy. But love without respect becomes labor. And labor without appreciation becomes grief. I no longer carry bitterness toward him. He was who he was, and I, for too long, forgot who I was. Now I spend my days writing, walking, and learning how to enjoy a quiet that doesn't feel like waiting. I still wear that navy dress sometimes. Only now, I wear it to lunch with friends, or even just for myself on a slow Sunday morning. I light candles at dinner, even when I'm alone. I don't do it for anyone else. I do it because my life deserves ceremony too. Amy visits often. Lauren calls daily. They tell me they see a version of me they never knew, lighter, more curious, more whole. I tell them this is who I was before I made myself smaller to fit someone else's story. There's a kind of freedom that comes with reclaiming your voice, not through anger, but through clarity, through choice. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like staying silent at dinner so you can finally hear your own thoughts. Sometimes it looks like walking away without slamming the door. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to choose yourself, for the first time in decades. And when you do, the world doesn't end. It begins. It's strange how a house remembers silence. After I left, Gary stayed in the old place. The girls visited sometimes, but less often. I heard from mutual friends that he started attending counseling, quietly, without making much of it. I didn't ask for details. Some stories are no longer mine to follow. I visited our willow tree once, yes, the one where we were married all those years ago. It stood tall still, roots deep in the same place, branches bending but never breaking. I ran my hand along its bark and thought, I survived. I bent, but I didn't break. Healing doesn't come like a sunrise. It arrives in pieces, sleeping through the night without dreaming of old arguments, smiling at a stranger in the grocery store, sitting alone at a cafe without looking at the door. That's when I knew I hadn't just ended something. I had begun something new. Some days are heavy. Memory doesn't vanish, it softens. I still remember our early love, our daughters being born, the way he used to hum while shaving. I don't erase those parts. They made me who I am. But I no longer let them define what comes next. In my new home, I painted one wall yellow, bright, defiant yellow, the color gray never liked. Now, it glows in the afternoon sun, like a small rebellion, like joy that doesn't ask permission. I sit there sometimes with my notebook and write stories about women who find their voice after decades of silence. Not always through endings, but through awakenings, through quiet decisions, through strength that doesn't need to be seen to, be felt. My story didn't end in heartbreak. It ended in clarity, in reclaiming, in peace. And that, to me, is the most honest kind of happy ending there is. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or quietly forgotten, know that you're not alone. So many of us carry stories beneath our smiles, strength beneath our silence. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Leave a comment and tell us, when was the moment you realized you mattered again? And if you haven't yet, let today be the beginning. Subscribe for more true, heartfelt stories that honor quiet strength, deep emotion, and the justice we give ourselves when no one else will. Your story matters. You matter. Always have. Always will.